Have you ever been having a conversation with someone, either sharing opinions or talking about something cool you found out, or even just info dumping, but the conversation ends up turning either political or into an argument with someone who just seems very misinformed? Better yet, have you ever felt that the average person nowadays has become maybe just gullible or dumber? Like you're talking to a brick wall. Today's world seems to be filled with people who defend their opinion to their last dying breath, no matter how wrong they may be. It is certainly a very counterproductive state for a society to be in. Or is it? So what is going on here? Why is it happening now? Well, for starters, what you and others are experiencing is a little social phenomenon called polarization. Something that has seemed to become more and more common nowadays. What is even crazier is that it's becoming common in every belief, not just naturally debated or heated topics like the big three. But to understand that, we need to first understand where the word comes from and what it means.
Polarization has two definitions that are very similar, one being a social construct and the other being a physical concept. Of course, in classic linguistic fashion, these two ideas share a name because they are very similar in structure. So to understand the social version, we need to understand the physics concept. In physics, light and other electromagnetic waves experience a directional oscillation when they, wave. Essentially, this means that waves can wave from left to right, up and down, or at an angle, relative to the observer, of course. And thus, they also have an ability to collide with objects on a three-dimensional plane, not just a 2D plane. When many waves oscillate in different directions, we call them unpolarized waves. When a light source emits light, the wave takes on a bunch of orientations and directions. Thus, when light comes from a source, it is naturally unpolarized. But what if you don't want light going in all sorts of orientations? And what if it hits something? Well, this is where polarization comes in. Polarization happens when a method is used to polarize a wave, essentially either filtering out other orientations or transforming all the waves to share one orientation. There are a number of methods one can use to polarize a wave, either by redirecting their orientations through special materials that refract the light, or one can create a filter that blocks undesired wave orientations from passing through. These sunglasses, for example, polarize light via the filter method, which allows it to filter out certain orientations of light, thus reducing the overall amount of light that reaches your eyes. You could think of it like a bunch of parallel lines that block any light that moves perpendicular to the material. But in reality, the true mechanics here are much more complicated, involving things like electric fields produced by the waves, but you can learn that elsewhere.
Now that we have some resemblance of a basis, we can use this principle of filtering for extreme angles of light and translate it into a social construct. Polarization from a social aspect is, for the most part, very similar to the physics concept that shares its name. Polarization from a social aspect is when beliefs, opinions, ideologies all seem to become more divided and extreme, at least in simple terms. But this concept can be narrowed based on types of social polarization.
The most recognizable form of polarization is political polarization. This type of polarization is usually defined in relation to a two-party system, expressing it like a spectrum, with two ends being extreme beliefs. There are a number of graphic representations of this type of spectrum online. I will be using a modified one here for ease of use to understand it from an American political spectrum. Note the Democratic and Republican labels, which are there to represent the typical siding that each of the two political party systems in America tend to relate to. Of course, I'm not talking about extreme variants, like I wouldn't consider a Democrat being an extreme far left. It could be anywhere on the left spectrum. They are simply there for ease of understanding. Regardless, Political polarization essentially describes a situation where most citizens begin slowly drifting towards the extremes of the ideological spectrum, while moderates become scarce. While the result of extreme political polarization vary, the conditions seem to lead to a generally argumentative public with the normalization of extreme or dangerous ideals, while in turn allowing for propaganda to become more effective and weaponized by the local governments as a way to try to gain power. Many individuals in the US typically believe that the US has begun to drift towards a more extreme polarization in recent years in terms of its political situation, with many individuals who rarely engage in the political landscape and those who try to stay moderate feeling isolated, like a minority in a way. This idea of hyperpolarized America, however, may actually be false, but that will start to make sense later.
Due to the nature of politics, however, I would prefer to avoid giving it too much attention here. I would like to talk about how polarization can apply to other ideas. This type of polarization has no special name, but it is studied under the concept of social sciences, so we're going to give it the name social polarization. The difference between it and political polarization isn't really too much. There isn't really too much of a gap. The main difference is the fact that social polarization can apply to any idea, making it a very broad thing, and the difference between a black and a white can be very random, one could say.
Typically, social polarization is used to define when two or more groups of people begin experiencing a divide into related beliefs. I use the term related loosely here because the connection can be obvious or barely related at all. Point is, social polarization happens when these groups of differing opinions begin to either drift towards more extreme variations of the belief, or the groups begin arguing about the opinions, usually on a larger scale.
This grouping of opinions can be broad or specific. The thing that makes social polarization problematic to some people is the assumed grouping, jumping to conclusions.
So, why does this happen? Well, according to multiple sources, polarization like this certainly is not new, but rather it has become more noticeable than before. To start, humans are social creatures, a trait that we integrate and value a lot in our society. Back when we were nomadic, however, it was practically a survival skill to group with people who are like-minded, while actively pushing away others who were different or disagreed. In addition, the common behavior of becoming more defensive or stubborn has a lot to do with brain development as we get older. As part of the transition to adulthood, your brain stops prepping for large amounts of new connections once you reach adulthood. It slows down and becomes a little harder to learn or gain new ideas as the nerve paths become more rigid. These rigid connections are created to help maintain the certain amounts of knowledge and traits that we gained over the years that happen to keep us alive. It's so that we don't lose these special traits, behaviors that keep us alive, because evolution sees the alternative as, well, death. Unfortunately, as a society, this tends to lead to frequent arguments amongst confident but misinformed adults. Something that is quite common nowadays, unfortunately. So what does this have to do with polarization? Well, essentially, this just means that polarization isn't new, but rather we have become more aware of it. Thanks to the rise of the internet and its increased use, it creates a perfect environment where so many people can communicate instantly at once, allowing polarization to become more obvious. The internet made it easier for belief clashes and arguments to take place. This concept makes even more sense when you realize that before the internet, most people interacted with others in their local town, those who shared similar beliefs. But the internet broke the travel barrier that usually confined most people, allowing new and vastly different beliefs to be presented to others. Let's answer this question with a simple no. Polarization is a normal and common behavior of our social society. and numerous sources back polarization as not being the problem itself. Even more so, no one is in the wrong for actively seeking out like-minded groups or ending up in internet echo chambers. Instead, the real problem lies in what dangers are being amplified by the newfound awareness of social polarization. For starters, the recent rise in social media use has definitely increased polarization by a small amount. This is due to social media algorithms being designed in a way to maximize profits and user engagement, with the unfortunate side effect of creating ideological echo chambers and confirmation bias, thus feeding polarization further while also amplifying the effects of misinformation and weaponization of exaggeration to instill hostility. No matter your stance on the recent debates about social media, it without a doubt plays a major role in not only contributing to polarization, but also plays a role in feeding the negative view of polarization as a problem. Social media and the internet, of course, aren't the only source of issues. They just happen to be the biggest players currently. There are, of course, other concepts that play a role in causing problems. Largely, our own collective views on polarization serves as a problem as well, coming from the standard belief that polarization and opposing opinions are the project of epistemic irrationality. But this is a bad way to view it. The truth is, polarization is closer to being the result of rational human deliberation and limitations. It's likely that irrationality and hostile belief clashes are instead the result of a negative view of polarization as a whole. It's also common for political entities to weaponize and perpetuate this misconception as a method of maintaining strong political support and following, which would explain the common belief amongst Americans that our country is extremely polarized politically. Personally, I think it's safe to say that arguing with stubborn people is not a fun experience, so dealing with negatives of polarization is complicated.
If there's anything you should take away from this, it should be this. Beliefs are what make us unique. It does no one any good to argue with no progress. If you should handle polarization in any way, you should simply stay informed. Don't trust the internet with your life. Use those critical thinking skills. And of course, remember, there is nothing wrong with being misinformed. The true value is in your ability to be flexible and improve. A side note, don't argue with stubborn people or inflexible people. The effort isn't really worth it if they're not willing to learn. Thanks for listening to me yap. Stay awesome.
Stay awesome.
Stay
Smile.
awesome. Stay curious. Stay awesome.
Stay awesome. Stay inquisitive. Stay curious, guys.
Stay curious, guys.
Make sure to like and subscribe to my YouTube channel and buy my merch on redbubble.com. Hello, anybody wants to Redbubble.com and buy our shirts?